This story right here is not getting, in my opinion, as much attention as it should. So I'm going to give it as much attention as I possibly can. So this woman's name is Janie Marshall, and she was 86 years old, and she had dementia. I've talked about Alzheimer and dementia on my channel in numerous stories plenty of times, so we already know how that is. But anyway, basically the story is that she was a patient at a hospital, and she was just wandering through the halls because she probably didn't know where she was at. And she happened to lose her footing in one of the rooms, and she ended up grabbing the IV pole of a woman who was there for getting treatment for the virus. And the patient ended up pushing Janie, and where she fell and hit her head. And she ended up, I guess you can say getting a concussion. I'm not exactly sure if it was a concussion because I'm going to read the article, but it sounds like that's what it could have been. Because she, in her eyes, violated the 6 feet away social distancing rule. And a few days later, Janie ended up dying. As a matter of fact, I don't even think it was a few days. It was very, very recent. So I'm going to go ahead and read this article, and we're going to get a little bit more information about this. One Saturday afternoon in late March, as the virus pandemic flooded hospitals across New York City with desperately ill people, an 86-year-old lost her bearings and started wandering the emergency room at Woodhull Medical and Mental Health Center in Brooklyn. The woman, Janie Marshall, who had dementia, grabbed onto another patient's IV pole to regain her balance and orient herself. The patient, Cassandra Lundy, age 32, had apparently become irate that Miss Marshall had broken the 6 feet of personal space recommended to help prevent the spread of the virus, law enforcement officials said. Miss Lundy shoved the older woman, knocking her onto the floor. Miss Marshall struck her head and died 3 hours later. Miss Marshall's death underscored how hospital officials are struggling to keep order in healthcare facilities overrun by the pandemic, as crowding generates a new level of fear and anxiety. Initially, hospital officials handed Miss Lundy a summons for disorderly conduct, but a week later, after the medical examiner ruled Miss Marshall's death a homicide, the police charged Miss Lundy with manslaughter and assault. How do you put your hands on an 86-year-old woman, said Miss Marshall's grandniece Antoinette Leonard Jean Charles, age 41, a medical student in Tennessee. I also understand the fear level of every person in New York has. There is a notion of every man for themselves, but attacking an elderly person that went too far. A spokesman for Brooklyn Defender Services, which is representing Ms. Lundy, declined to comment. New York officials imposed social distancing rules, maintaining space between people to stop the spread of the highly contagious virus in mid-March, shortly after the metropolis became the epicenter of the outbreak in the United States. The virus has claimed the lives of thousands of New Yorkers in a little more than a month. In a statement, Woodhull hospital officials said they were cooperating with investigators. We are terribly saddened by this death. We are committed to ensuring a safe, health-focused environment in these very demanding times so our heroic healthcare workers can continue to deliver the quality, compassionate care New Yorkers need more than ever. The events that led to Miss Marshall's death began on March 27th when she told her niece she had a piercing stomach ache. The niece, Eleanor Leonard, age 72, called an ambulance which took Miss Marshall to Woodhull, where she had been treated for similar symptoms earlier in the week. In the crowded emergency room, Miss Marshall was diagnosed with a blocked bowel, and doctors said they would admit her. But the hospital, in an effort to limit the spread of the virus, did not allow Ms. Leonard or other family members to stay with her in the emergency room. Ms. Leonard said she could do nothing but wait by the phone for updates. The next day at about 2 p.m., Ms. Marshall, disoriented, began walking around the emergency room. She crossed paths with Ms. Lundy, and the women, both from Brooklyn, got into an argument before the younger woman pushed her to the ground. Miss Marshall hit her head on the floor, lost consciousness, and died hours later, investigators said. Miss Lundy told detectives she had shoved Miss Marshall because she got into the defendant's space, according to a criminal complaint. The attack was captured on surveillance video. Unaware of Miss Marshall's injury, Miss Leonard kept calling the hospital that day. She finally reached someone shortly after 5 p.m. who told her that Miss Marshall was in with a nurse receiving medical care. I thought that's great, she's being tended to, Miss Leonard recalled. I didn't know she was dead already. Ms. Leonard went to sleep feeling hopeful. Her phone rang at 3:30 the next morning. A doctor told her that Ms. Marshall had gone into cardiac arrest. Are you telling me she's dead? Ms. Leonard recalled saying, "What happened?" Ms. Leonard says she went to the hospital later that morning, but after several hours of waiting, was sent home without an explanation. "We thought it was weird. Cardiac arrest," Ms. Jean Charles, the grandniece, said. She had gone in for something completely different. She suffered from dementia, bowel blockage, not heart problems that we knew of. Then a cousin on Long Island called Miss Leonard with troubling news. He had seen a news report online. "Did you know your aunt was murdered?" the cousin asked. Miss Leonard then searched her aunt's name on Google and saw a new account. I was so stunned, she said. "It just tore at my gut that something like this would happen." Ms. Leonard wondered why hospital officials did not inform her about the incident when it happened. "I understand we were in the middle of a pandemic," she said, "but to say nothing." Ms. Lundy had previous arrests, including charges of drug possession in 2018 and 19, according to court records. It remained unclear why she had visited the hospital that night. Miss Marshall was born in Abbeville, South Carolina in 1934, the youngest of 12 children. Her parents died when she was young, and she followed some of her siblings to New York City, settling in Williamsburg. She arrived with big dreams and wide eyes. She's ready to take on the world. She became a successful accountant at a time when few black women practiced the profession, eventually working for the Social Security Administration and earning a bachelor's degree from Queens College. She never married or had children, but she was a role model to her numerous nieces and nephews, her relatives said. "We don't want to remember her as a victim," Ms. Jean Charles said. "She always told us there is no shame in being the first African American in any field. She was a leader. As it has become customary during the virus pandemic, Ms. Marshall's relatives and members of her church, Concord Baptist Church of Christ in Brooklyn, were planning to attend a virtual funeral service on Tuesday to abide by social distancing rules. Ms. Leonard says she planned to ride in a limousine by herself to Pine Lawn Memorial Park on Long Island and bid her one last farewell inside the vehicle. "We want to obey social distancing rules, and yes, she died because of these social distancing rules," Ms. John Charles said. "It's ironic in a very sad way." Well, before I get into this story or give my take on it, let me offer my condolences to this woman's family. Like, this is one big spiraling story that starts one way and ends a whole nother way that you don't want it to. Like, imagine you're going in there for one thing and you end up getting into an altercation, not because of anything that you did, because you probably didn't know what was going on. This woman had dementia. Now, I'm glad that they upgraded this woman's charges to manslaughter, first of all, because she could have handled that a whole different way. Like, here you are, you're 32, and this woman was 86. And you felt the need to just put your hands, just push her out of the way. And now, she's gone. Like, she did no hesitation. Like, she could have easily just look, I'm just trying to stay away from you and everything because I'm trying to do the social distancing thing. And now this woman is dead because of you. And let's just say that Janie Marshall had the illness. You putting your hands on her now that would have made you be exposed to it, which means you probably got it because y'all were arguing with each other, and when you're talking, germs flies out of your mouth. So if you don't have it by now, then that means clearly she never had it. Then the hospital is also at fault because they kept the family in the dark. Like, you had this woman, her relative, thinking that all was good when you said she was being tended to, and then it's something else. And what's even more worse is she couldn't even find out from the hospital, the last place she took her relative. She had to find out from another relative that they found out on the news that she died. And then on top of that, not only did she die, that she was murdered. And when I first heard about the story, I said, murdered inside the hospital? How in the world does that happen? I'm like, did the doctor do something to her? But then to find out it was another patient that did it. Like that, if I was the family, I don't care what kind of pandemic is going on in the world. We may not be able to do it right now, but we're going to do it later when this stuff kind of dies down. I'm taking your ass to court. The hospital, because they were very negligent in not telling them what was going on with their relative. Had to step off right quick, but yeah, I would take that hospital to court and definitely bringing up a lawsuit against that woman who pushed and then later killed this woman. basically, now that this thing got moved up to manslaughter charges, hopefully she ends up in some kind of prison cell. Point blank, period. And see, they have those surveillance cameras right there that's going to possibly work against her. But, it's messed up all the way around as it stands at this moment with this virus. And everything in between is it's draining. It really is. But like I said, the family should not have been left in the dark. That woman did not have to push this woman to the ground. And she had to push her pretty hard for her to, they said she hit her head and she died just 3 hours later. Like, she had no chance of survival. Like, it's almost like she was gone the minute her head hit that floor. So she probably could have had a fractured skull or something, and, internal bleeding. Once that bleeding gets around that brain, the chance of pulling out of that is slim to none. And she was right there where she was able to seek medical help. It's not like she was home when this happened. She was right there and died within hours. So, but yeah. And I also feel there needs to be something better in place when it comes to people who are patients who have dementia. And I'm almost certain that that's what they informed the hospital of that she had when they brought her in. So, with them, they going to tend to wander. And I wonder why no one thought to say, like, excuse me, what are you doing here and everything like that. Maybe she was trying to find her way back. So she, short-term memory loss. She left out and didn't know where she was. But again, condolences to the family. I know they are dealing with a lot right now, with the loss of a loved one in the midst of this pandemic. Is probably one of the worst things to deal with at this time. But y'all let me know what y'all think about this story down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Make sure you follow me on Twitter if you haven't done so already. Have your notifications turned on, and I will talk to you in the next one.